When Jameison March, owner of March Mortuaries, put a sign out front of his business saying that he'd be selling honey, people thought he must be joking. What kind of mortician would sell honey? Would he sell it next to the caskets in his showroom? Would he offer it graveside at cemeteries? No one knew. But there was much speculation about that little sign. Those who asked Jameison were in for quite a treat. Jameison told them that he would be selling his honey right here at the mortuary, and even gave them a sample so they might tell their friends. What they sampled was supposedly the best honey any of them had ever eaten. They went on and on about the texture and the taste and the strange exotic flavor within the honey. They said how they couldn't wait for Jameison to sell honey, and they'd be buying as much as they could on opening day. Others began to question where he was keeping his bees. They saw no beehives on his property, a 2-bedroom apartment above the mortuary. They saw no hives on the mortuary property at all, in fact. They saw no hives in the cemetery or near the crematorium. But still, the honey came. On the 3rd of March, the first jar of that miraculous concoction appeared in the front room of Jameison Mortuary. The mortuary was crowded for the next several days, and by Friday, not a jar was left to be purchased. Again, people praised the texture and the taste of his honey, as well as the myriad flavors that one would find within the jar. One of the buyers, Bert Lancaster, owned a large honey operation of his own. It is said that when he tasted Jameson's honey, he proclaimed that no bee in his field had ever produced anything so sweet. Some would tell you that he burned his beehives that very afternoon, but that's little more than town gossip. For that summer back in '86, no one could get enough of Jameson's honey. They say Helen Price used that honey to defeat her rival Linda Moore in that summer's 4th of July bake-off. They say Bert Cavell put that honey in his mead and could not make enough of it to satiate the local drunks. They say Mary Sanders was taken to the hospital over in Oakley when she ate 10 jars in a day and was reaching for an 11th when her stomach ruptured. But again, that's all town gossip. What is fact was the discovery made by Randall Smith, a local tabloid writer, in the fall of '86. Randall had a reputation for being less of a journalist and more of a mudslinger. If there was a nasty rumor started, Randall could usually be traced back to it. He'd grown pretty tired of hearing about Jameison and his amazing honey. Randall was of the opinion that if something was too good to be true, then it likely was. He thought Jameson's honey must have some sort of secret ingredient that got people addicted to it. Maybe it was even a cover for some kind of dope operation that Jameison was running out of the mortuary or the cemetery. Whatever the case, Randall could smell a story, and it would be sweeter than any nectar the old mortician could produce. So one night, as the moon hung full over Pleasant Rock Cemetery, Randall and his friends, Rooster Malloy and Charles Drainer, took a trip out to the cemetery to have a look around. Someone had reported earlier that week that they had seen some larger-than-normal bees around the cemetery grounds, and speculated that these may be the source of Jameson's honey. As it was the only lead that Randall had, it seemed as good as any. So after a couple of drinks at the Legion Hall, the 3 men piled into Rooster's old Chevy and headed down to do some late-night snooping. Randall still tells anyone who will listen how the graveyard was as silent as its namesake. The gate was locked, sporting a brand new Academy security lock, one of the big thick gold ones that graced the sheds and fences of discerning security buffs in town. So the 3 men had to find a different way in. This was strange, since the cemetery had never been locked before. Jameison had always let people come and go as they please, but just recently, the old man had gotten a little cagey about many things. For one, the cemetery was now locked at nightfall. For another, no one was allowed in the basement of the mortuary, not even the man who came to deliver the bodies for the families. For a third, no one but his 2 sons were allowed to work in the mortuary anymore, and both of them were under pain of death should they reveal the secrets of Jameson's honey. The 3 men had walked around the fence before they found a spot where the last windstorm had knocked down a thick old pine. It lay on the points around the top, creating a rude bridge over the wall. Now, none of them being particularly spry, they had all of them carefully shimmied up the fallen tree and then dropped down into the cemetery, careful not to get stuck on them spikes. They all felt a chill as they stood in the quiet boneyard, and Randall claimed that Rooster looked ready to brave the spikes if it meant being out of there. The wind rattled the skeletal trees on the grounds, and the little flags that had been stuck on some of the graves for Labor Day snapped mischievously and startled them more than once. They had brought flashlights, but the big old trader's moon that looked down on them was more than enough to keep them from tripping into a open grave or smashing their shins on an ill-placed tombstone. The quiet cemetery was enough to sober even the bravest of them, and it was probably why they heard the shovels before they saw the men. Crouching behind a particularly large family headstone, Randall saw 2 men digging into a fresh grave. They were exhuming a body by the light of that pregnant moon, and Randall knew whose it was to boot. We had been to the widow Hadley's funeral that day, and it appeared that whoever these men were, they were taking her from her freshly dug resting place. As they watched, the corpse flopped to the surface most unceremoniously, followed by March's sons, Hannibal and Gavin. Hannibal hefted the body, leaving his younger brother to fill in the hole as he took it deeper into the cemetery. Gavin went to his work, and bent as he was, he didn't notice the 3 men as they snuck around him and followed his older brother. Hannibal had been a football player, a linebacker for the local school team in his day, and he toted the frail old woman as easily as someone might a sack of corn. As they followed him, the 3 men weren't sure what they expected to find, but Randall was certain it would be something to add a macabre twinge to the story that he meant to write. They followed Hannibal as he came to a newly built mausoleum, the name across the door reading March. He unlocked the door and unceremoniously tossed the old woman into the crypt. The men hunkered low behind a pair of gravestones, but they needn't have bothered. Hannibal was a big boy, but his night eyes left something to be desired. He no more saw them than he did the place marker that he nearly tripped over on the way back to his brother, and as he stomped off into the cemetery, the 3 men approached the crypt. The mortuary was a nice new one, sunk into the ground a little to protect any caskets placed down there, and it would have looked more at home in New Orleans than this Georgia backwater town. To the knowledge of anyone in town, the Marches did not have a family crypt until very recently. The only March buried there would be Jameson's wife, since his mother and father were buried up in Macon at their own family plot. Hannibal may not have been the smartest March in town, but it appeared he was smart enough to lock up behind himself. Another one of those big, thick academy locks, the kind that had been on the front gate, greeted the 3 men as they got to the door, and they were forced to prowl around the mausoleum to see what could be found. It was Charles who found the little vent in the mausoleum, but it was Randall who saw the horrors that lay inside. Randall and Rooster had been looking for a window, or perhaps another entrance, when Charles came hoofing it back to show them that he had found a little vent that opened into the crypt. Randall asked him to show him where it was, and the three men found the little opening, just big enough for a large child to fit inside. Charles and Rooster now were pulp wooders, and much too big to squeeze into holes. Randall, however, had made a career of squeezing into places he was not precisely wanted. Opting to stick his head in to get a better look, Randall had his friends hold his legs while he shimmied into the vent. Charles and Rooster slid him in as far as they dared, and they said his flashlight could be seen through the slats at the top of the mausoleum. When Randall started screaming and yelling for them to pull him out, it sounded like the devil himself had gotten hold of him. When they pulled him out, they said he was white as a sheet and said to tell the sheriff immediately. Whether the brothers had gone when they made their escape or not, they missed them entirely as they beat a retreat back to town. Now the sheriff took some convincing to get out of bed, but when Randall told him what they had seen down the crypt, he came with 3 other men and the biggest set of bolt cutters they could find at the station. Jameson's sons were leaving when the sheriff and his boys pulled up, so they didn't end up needing the bolt cutters after all. When he laid it out to the 2 young men that they could either cooperate or sit in the same prison cell with their father, the one he was surely to occupy, they decided it might be in their best interest to show him what they was doing. When the sheriff asked the boys if they would need suits, the 2 shook their heads. Bees are mostly docile, Hannibal told them, and sure enough, when they cracked the door open, not a one came charging out. They descended into the ground, and by the light of the sheriff's flashlight, they saw the horrors below. The bees swarmed the small pile of corpses, taking whatever they used to make the honey back to their hives. The hives covered the walls of the crypt, making a sticky webwork of catacombs. The corpses down below were fresh, most of them having died very recently, and the bees were taken to them with gusto. The brothers said they came down here once or twice a week to harvest the honey, and that the vulture bees were taken to the warm Georgia summer quite nicely. When the sheriff interrogated them, both said that it had been their father's idea. He had read about vulture bees and thought they sounded like an interesting idea. Then, when their mother died, he'd done a little experiment. He'd put her down in the mortuary and procured some vulture bees of his own. The boys had been horrified when he'd showed them what he'd been up to, but even they had to admit the honey had been the sweetest they had ever eaten. Something about the readily available nature of the local pollen, mixed with the bees' instincts to collect whatever they got from the corpses, had made for a potent and delicious treat. She was the catalyst for all this, Hannibal had said. Those first few jars he handed out to the people for tasting were honey made from our mother's body. He began to cry then, but the sheriff had all the evidence he needed to proceed. He arrested Jameison March that very night, but there seemed to be some confusion on what to charge him with. Couldn't really get him for murder because he hadn't killed anybody. Couldn't really get him for fraud because he buried them bodies just like he said he would. In the end, they got him on simple corpse desecration and a little misdemeanor fraud for not telling the families what he intended to do with them their bodies. He got less than 5 years in prison. I hear the warden let him keep the beehives in the prison garden. Seems like his talents didn't go to waste, not even behind bars. He left town when his time was served, he and his boys. The funeral home's been empty ever since. The police found the beginnings of his beekeeping operation in the basement. That, and a secondary hive with a swarm of agitated vulture bees. Jameison tried to sell the mortuary, but nobody seemed to want a place with that sort of reputation. It collapsed under a late February snow back in 2012, and they destroyed the mausoleum they found all them bodies in about a year after Jameison went to prison. And that's the sordid tale of Jameison March and his bees. I have no idea what they did with those bees after they turned them out of the March mausoleum. They likely just turned them loose into an environment that was alien to them. So, if you should be traveling through the Georgia back roads and see some larger-than-average bees, or taste sweeter-than-average honey, be very suspicious about its origins. Good evening, everyone. It's me, Dr. Plague. Thank you so much for joining me for tonight's story. If you think you might be able to handle just one more creepy tale, go ahead and click on one of the stories you can doubtlessly see appearing at the end of this one. If you're not subscribed, go ahead and hit that subscribe button too. Maybe hit that bell so you don't miss any of the spooky things that we do here. If, like so many of my patrons, you decide you'd like to get your spooky a little bit earlier, why not come on down to Patreon and have a look at some of the great tiers that I have. My $5 tiers get their spooky a little early, and they have their name read out at the end of every TikTok and every YouTube video that I make. If you'd like a copy of my latest book, there's a link below to my Amazon profile. I've got mini books. I'm sure you'll find one that'll suit you there. I always recommend Stragview Stories, as it's the one I'm the most proud of. It contains a large collection of prison horror stories out of Stragview, the prison that I've made in the Georgia hills. So, if you'd like to have a look, come on down. Before we go, let's go ahead and thank our patrons. Thanks to Janet for being our Spooky Skeleton tier contributor, and thanks to Winter, Xaronan, Emily Coltsfoot, Stephanie Carrington, Marianne Schuler, Tyler Parker, and Jennifer Damron for being my Ghostly Reader tier contributors. Thanks, everyone. We just couldn't do the show without you. And as always, thanks for stopping by. Dr. Plague, signing off. Have a wonderful evening.